America, bonjour, hi, Canada. 80 years ago this morning, Imperial Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in a day that does live in infamy, as FDR predicted it would. And 80 years is a blink of an eye in the span of history, but it will never not be remembered by loyal Americans. I took my dad there, who was in high school when Pearl Harbor happened, and floating off the coast of Japan when Harry Truman ordered the atomic bombs dropped, part of the invasion force. He had been all over the place, but had not ever been shot at. Didn't like flying around, didn't like floating around the Pacific with Japanese submarines going after him. But he never got to Pearl Harbor until he was almost 80. And he asked me to take him, and he wanted to go to the Arizona Memorial because he lost a friend from high school, Ashtabula High School. And we did, and I went, and I think it's one of the most sacred places in America. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt's uncle, Joe Tossig, was on the Nevada that day, lost his leg. Her mother was in Pearl Harbor that day with my sister-in-law, Snow, and her husband, the late George Phillip, who would die in the war, skippering the Twigs destroyer off of Okinawa, was out at sea with the Enterprise, thank God, because the Enterprise kept us in the game long enough to rebuild to get to Midway. Pearl Harbor is very much alive, and last night, if you happen to have seen Special Report, I was on the panel with Leslie Marshall and the wonderful Kim Strassel. Leslie's nice too, and Brett had done a great job, but they chose to have a one-segment panel and end with a Pearl Harbor veteran who is going strong, 100 years old next week. I'm glad they did. A lot of people don't remember Pearl Harbor. It's important to do so 80 years ago today. It's also a sad day. I began yesterday praying for Fred Hyatt, and then yesterday morning got the shocking news that Fred had died. Fred was my boss, the editor of the editorial pages at the Washington Post, and I write for the Post. Maybe the most decent, principled, kind, sturdy fellow I've known in a long time in Washington, D.C. It's possible. Old school liberal. You know, very much down the middle, center left. I would have called him a Jack Kennedy liberal, but I don't think people would understand what that means anymore. There are two editorials about Fred today. The editorial board, of which, of course, he was the leader. It's titled Opinion. Fred Hyatt was an editor of surpassing integrity, intelligence, and compassion. Its first paragraph reads, Fred, who edited these pages for nearly 22 years before his death on Monday at the age of 66, was a consummate journalist, a dogged reporter, a brilliant editor, a graceful writer. He will be remembered by all of us for his human qualities. Mr. Hyatt, to everyone at the Post, he was simply Fred. He will be remembered by us above all for his human qualities. Mr. Hyatt was gifted with seemingly effortless charm, good humor, and emotional acumen. Boy, did he have that. That enabled him to head a diverse and sometimes fractious staff through a daunting series of challenges, from the attacks of September 11th, 2001, and the wars that followed to the presidency of Donald Trump. Mr. Hyatt made it possible for the Post's opinion writers and the content they produced to encompass a wide range of views on virtually every subject of public debate, without the rancor, personal enmity, and bad faith that had become so prevalent elsewhere in Washington and the nation. Our respect for and loyalty to Mr. Hyatt, and his for us, held his staff together. I can attest to this. I am one of the conservatives who's a contributing columnist there, one of the people who supported Donald Trump. I had many long conversations with Fred, enjoyed our probably semi-annual lunches. I didn't see a lot of him. I talked to him when I needed to. Talked to him a week before he died, primarily about the Browns-Ravens, but mostly substantively about the Uyghurs. He had written a wonderful piece about the Uyghurs. He stood up for the Uyghurs. I had a chance last night on Special Report with Brett Baer to do the same. The United States declared a boycott, a diplomatic boycott. That's not enough. It's better than nothing. It's better late than never, but it's not enough. I mean, no one should go. No American corporation should have anything to do with a genocide-perpetrating country. And Fred was adamant about that. That's why I think we got along. He put human rights first. He was a year ahead of me at Harvard. I didn't know him then, but he began writing at the Crimson then. Lifelong man of ink, lifelong man of words. Eschewed being on TV, just didn't care for it. He got a great stable of writers. I mean, from Jonathan Capehart to me, Mark Thiessen, Henry Olsen, and I are sort of the right flank of the editorial page of the Washington Post. Donald Graham also added. Donald Graham was the owner of the Washington Post, the publisher. He hired Fred Hyatt after Meg Greenfield and I think Steve Rosenfeld, was that who it was who was in between briefly? There have really only been two editors of the opinion section, Meg Greenfield, who was legendary, and Fred, and an interim, Stephen Rosenfeld, who I did not know. I read Meg Greenfield religiously, maybe the best writer of the last 50 years in Washington, D.C. Donald Graham has written an opinion piece about Fred, the title of which I've never known a better editor than Fred Hyatt, or a better person. Wouldn't you like someone to say that about you when you pass? That's really the highest accolade. I would encourage you to read both of them. They are over. I've put them on my Twitter feed there at the Washington Post. Fred Hyatt will be greatly missed. Wonderful man. Decent, sturdy, loyal, tough. I mean, we had some pretty blistering arguments, but within the confines of two people talking to each other. I've quit on so many editors who are idiots. I mean, I really have. I've quit on editors a lot. I just won't be edited by people who are unserious and people who are trying to impose their set of beliefs on writers. Why be a writer if your editor is a moron? Fred's the best editor I ever had by a long shot. His team is extraordinary. And I hope, I'm sure he is being greeted by St. Peter, because he was on the side of the angels, and they'll say, welcome aboard. In the news, on the Ukrainian front, grinding war in a weary anticipation of invasion, according to the New York Times. President Biden is speaking today with President Putin. I'm worried about this. I had lunch yesterday with former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, a dear friend here in Washington. He's in town. And he's worried about a double. Putin moving on Ukraine, Xi moving on Taiwan, and the weakness of the United States. I couldn't believe Brett Baier interviewed Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, on Saturday at the Reagan Forum. Lloyd Austin said this to Brett, cut number 13.
Brett, I've always found that it's never a good idea to publish red lines. I would say that it's really important to the United States of America to ensure that we protect our capabilities. And I think
Brett had asked him about, do you have any red lines in space? And Lloyd Austin, I mean, this speech, this exchange was immediately translated and zipped around the Kremlin, the Forbidden City. Every leader in Russia, every leader in China read it. Listening it, Brett says, do we have any red lines in space? Because the Chinese have been attacking our satellites. So it's a very obvious question. And listen to what the Secretary of Defense said. Play it again, please.
Brett, I've always found that it's never a good idea to publish red lines. I would say that it's really important to the United States of America to ensure that we protect our capabilities. And I think
that's just so provocative. I'll talk with Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Tom Cotton about it later today. Sidney Powell raised more than $14 million spreading election falsehoods. If you gave money to Sidney Powell, geez, boy, did you get taken in. The Justice Department sued Texas over redistricting. They will lose. Glaxo, great news, says its COVID-19 antibody drug works against Omicron. That is great, great news. And Jack Kane, the general, said Putin views Biden as weak. He's right, and that's scary, as Joe Biden plans to sit down today virtually with Vladimir Putin. The 69-year-old former KGB colonel already has the measure of Joe Biden. I hope somebody pumps Joe up before he sits down virtually with Vladimir Putin. More ahead, America. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt on this Tuesday, December 7th, 80 years after Pearl Harbor. Welcome back, America. One of my favorite secular carols, Jack Jones. Nobody like Jack Jones except David Drucker. You know, it's just perfect. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh.
I want to play for you a Reagan Forum excerpt of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Brett Baer asks him, "Are there red lines in space?" Here's what he responds. Cut number 13.
Brett, I've always found that it's never a good idea to publish red lines. I would say that it's really important
Stop.
to the.
When you say it's never a good idea to publish red lines, doesn't that mean you don't have any red lines?
I don't think so. I mean, that could be what he meant in that case, but I don't think that necessarily means he doesn't have them or this administration doesn't have them. I think it's important that if we are going to state a red line, we're fully prepared to back it up, and that's been the problem we've had over the past decade or so, depending on the administration, particularly the Obama administration, obviously, in Syria. Once you make any red line clear, I don't care what it is, you have to back it up. So as long as they're not publishing them, that's the word to use, and then ignoring them, I don't think that's a problem.
David, you're very generous. If he had said, "Brett, I've got red lines. Putin and Xi know what they are, but I'm not going to tell you," that's one thing. When he says, "I'm not going to tell you if we have red lines," that's another. It's like Dean Acheson at the press club in January of 1950, and we had a war in Korea that year because people don't get it. And then his remarks as Secretary of Defense at the Reagan Defense Forum are translated into the various languages around the world of thugs in Iran and China and Russia, and they're read, and they look at that and they say, weak, weak, weak.
Well, look, it's very possible they could do that. I think the administration has taken a number of actions, this administration, that can have real consequences geopolitically for the United States in terms of our ability to exert and project power and hold off China and Russia. And obviously I'm watching right now how we're handling Ukraine. And if that's the interpretation, that's a problem. What I've been concerned about and what I've been watching is what the president is communicating to Xi and Putin privately in terms of things that may not be revealed. Because obviously they're engaged in a number of actions around the world, and Russia with Ukraine, the Chinese with Taiwan, and it should be very clear to them that we have a red line so that they know what not to do, even if we choose not to publicize it, because it puts them then domestically in a political situation where they're more likely to try and cross the red line. So those are the things that I'm looking for. And your general point is not off base. But with the statement that you played, just listening to that clip, that didn't strike me as problematic.
Well, we have to disagree. Let me ask you about the call. I am hoping that Deputy President Ron Klain and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan are on it, because the president is having great difficulty communicating. And I don't think that's a partisan statement. I listened to his speech on Build Back Better yesterday, and I thought, my gosh, he just can't make a point.
Well, President Biden has never really been that good at making a point, and he's always been rather meandering in his speech. I think what should concern you and what it should concern a lot of Republicans, particularly from the point of view from which they look at national security policy, is whether the president is willing to use or make clear the United States is willing to use military force in certain instances, because this president, when he was a United States Senator over the years and when he was Vice President, has always been uncomfortable with the idea of using military force. He just has. And
no, that's right. Robert Gates noted it. Yep.
And I think that has to be the read on him from foreign leaders. And if he is not willing to get comfortable with this idea that our adversaries have to believe we're willing to use force, then it doesn't really matter whether he can, string three sentences together or not, because the point that they take away will be that they can do what they want because the U.S. won't react.
Let me finish, David, by asking about your book, In Trump's Shadow. I have Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Tom Cotton coming on today. Are both of those senators in Trump's shadow?
Yes, they are.
How's the book selling?
The book is doing great, and the interesting thing about I took the question literally.
I
But
know.
I would say that they're, look, what you think I get used to this by now? I think that they are.
I'm going to play that back for them, I think, just to get you in trouble.
You should. I think they'll both get a laugh out of it. Look, I mean, I think everybody, I think all major Republican figures right now are in Trump's shadow to the degree that the former president still has a really good relationship with Republican voters, and it impacts how Republicans in Washington tend to operate, and it impacts policy choices they tend to make.
I don't think they're in Trump's literal shadow. I think they're both getting ready to run for president. I don't know if they'll pull the trigger if the former president does, but we'll see. David M. Drucker on Twitter. His book, In Trump's Shadow, is a great Christmas present for all people who are interested in the future of politics in America. In Trump's Shadow by David M. Drucker. Byron York is next, America. Stay tuned through the break. I'll be right back. Morning, Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway live on this, the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. I'm joined by Byron York of the Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor. Good morning, Byron.
Good morning, Hugh.
I listened with great interest to Bret Baier's interview of Lloyd Austin at the Reagan Forum on Saturday. Bret asked the Secretary of Defense, China's doing stuff in space, attacking our satellites. Do you have a red line in space? And the Secretary of Defense responded thus, cut their teeth.
But I've always found that it's never a good idea to publish red lines.
Stop right there. What's that mean to you, Byron?
Well, first of all, I think the word publish is important. It doesn't mean the same as set. It means the difference between making a threat privately versus making a threat publicly. So I can't say what the administration has done privately that I don't know about. But I think the biggest factor in all this red line stuff is whether the target of the red line believes the United States will actually follow up, will actually do it. And I'm not sure that either China or Russia should believe that Joe Biden will actually do what he says. I mean, if you make a threat to somebody, you have to be prepared to follow up on it. Now, with Trump, when Donald Trump did something like killing Soleimani, the Iranian leader, I mean, I think everybody in the world went, wow, he'll do something.
Yep.
And that increases the power of a threat exponentially if you've done something. So I don't think Biden has that right now.
Do you remember when the Russians came over the hill in Syria and the Americans mowed them down?
Yes.
That is a red line. Don't come over that hill again. That's like in blood, a red line in blood. So I think what he said was incredibly provocative. If he had said, I have told, and the president has told Putin and Xi our red lines, don't worry, don't count on that, but I'm not going to tell you, Bret. That would have been fine. I don't think we have any red lines. I don't think this president has in his entire, 5, 6, 7 decade-long career, I don't know how long it is, I don't think he's ever articulated a red line.
Well, he became, he became a senator in 1973, so he's nearing his 50th year of this sort of stuff. And I did hear you refer to Robert Gates before, so I think we should actually read the portion of Robert Gates' memoir in which he discussed Biden. Quote, he's a man of integrity, incapable of hiding what he really thinks, and one of those rare people you could turn to for help in a personal crisis. Still, I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. That's 40 years. That is a long time.
He also, by the way, Byron, on this show, I read him that quote, Robert Gates. He said, I stand by that. I like him a lot, but I don't think he trusts generals. In fact, I'm worried about his antagonism towards the Pentagon. And so I think we saw that play out in Afghanistan catastrophically there, and I hope it doesn't play out that way. Let me talk to you now about the announcement of Devin Nunes going to run the Trump SPAC Former President Trump has announced he's in the media business now. They did a SPAC. It's raised a lot of money. Devin Nunes is going to go down. I was shocked by that. Are you?
I was. For a couple of reasons. With a new venture, you never know. And Nunes, we've talked about him almost entirely in terms of his work on the House Intelligence Committee, where he was chairman up to the 2018 elections and then ranking member after that. And we can get into this, but I mean, we owe credit to Nunes more than any other person for finding out some of the most important aspects of the Trump-Russia matter, more than any other person. On the other hand, I was saying we know him for that intelligence work, but he's also been a big deal on the House Ways and Means Committee, which is usually viewed as kind of the crown, the most important place in the House. And if Republicans took over the House next year, he would have a very good chance, and he won re-election, of course, he would have a very good chance of being chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And that is a huge deal to be giving up. Now, there's been talk about redistricting in California, that his district would go from a district that went +5 for Trump in the last election to, if it were changed, +3 for Biden. So it's a different district. He has been a target for years, especially since he began exposing FBI misconduct in the Trump-Russia affair and showing the entire sort of Democratic dirty tricks of the dossier and all of that. He's been a huge target. They really, really tried to get him in 2018. And, he would look forward to having to fight that kind of fight in a less hospitable district. So, you can understand this decision, but it's a really, really big loss for Republicans.
I think it is a big loss because Kevin Brady did do a lot when he was chair of Ways and Means. It's the most powerful non-speaker job in the House. Maybe Whip is up there. But I'll tell you, I don't think it's the district because even the tentative one that came out, it's still dairy country, and Devin Nunes would have won that. He's a formidable politician. He's not running. I think he's making money, Byron. I think he's a middle-aged guy who's going to go out and make some money. And I also think he's angry. And if the Trump SPAC becomes what he wants it to be, a platform that is pro-center-right, it will be incredibly successful. If it's not nutty, if it's not profane, if it's not lewd, if they get rid of anonymity, it could make a lot of money. Because Twitter, I remember the Solzhenitsyn autobiography, The Oak and the Calf. What if the wall is made of paper mache? Twitter's made of paper mache, so is Facebook. All it will take is one good product, and they will crumple.
Well, Nunes became really angry at Twitter over a lot of slanderous tweets directed at him, and as a matter of fact, actually filed some lawsuits which didn't go anywhere. But he left Twitter, had been using Parler a lot, so he has very, very strong feelings about social media. So so far, nobody has actually knocked down these paper tigers if that's what they are, and this would be the way to do it.
I'm actually optimistic. It just requires a certain discipline. You can't get overrun with trolls, and I think if they banish anonymity and make people credential up to have it, every journalist I know would go there. It's the trolls that make it nuts, right? I did special report last night with Brett for the first time and got trolled. It's nice to get comments from people who are real people, but you never know when it's a Russian bot, a Chinese bot, or some left-wing nut. I just can't pay attention to it, do you?
No, as a matter of fact, most people say that's Twitter. You tweet something, and maybe it's an entirely serious comment on this or that, and then just this whole wave of trollery comes up. And you're right, you don't know, are these real people or not? So, and you just dismiss it as Twitter, which is, Twitter's a cesspool, Twitter's this and that. And yet, so far, certainly in the media world, it remains the sort of the medium of choice. So, you're right. There's an opportunity for another place. Can one that's run or associated with Donald Trump be that opportunity? I don't know.
I think it just Devin Nunes is a good first step because Devin was there before the president. He's still there after the president. He's been on House Intel. He is a very smart guy, and I think that matters a lot. He'll present very well on investor offerings. I see the SECs after the former president already today. Let me conclude by asking you about what I just asked David Drucker. I have Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton coming up next hour. Are they in Trump's shadow? Do you expect people to run whether or not the former president runs for president? We have to start asking this question now.
Yeah, well, however you mean in the shadow, yes, they are. There's no doubt about it. And what I've gotten from talking to people in Iowa and other early voting states is there is enormous support for Donald Trump out there among the Republican base. There is some Trump fatigue, no doubt about that, but otherwise there is enormous support. And the belief is that all of these candidates, and there are a lot of them right now, are running a if Trump doesn't run campaign. And if he did run, he would clear the field.
Interesting. I'm not sure that he would, at least of Chris Christie, but we'll see. Byron York, thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure. Follow him at Twitter at Byron York. See him on Fox News. Watch and read his stuff at the Washington Examiner. Come right back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside the Beltway, joined by United States Senator Ted Cruz. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Hugh, good morning. Good to be with you.
Last night, Senator, I was on with Brett Baer on Special Report along with Leslie Marshall and Kim Strassel, and he brought up the diplomatic boycott. My position is it's better late than never, and something, not nothing, but it's not nearly enough. What do you think about boycotts of the Genocide Olympics?
Well, I think everything we can do to shine a light on the atrocities of China, on the murder, on the torture, on the genocide, on the concentration camps, I think everything we can do is good and positive. And so I agree with the diplomatic boycott. It's something I've called for a long time. I don't agree with what some people are calling for, which is a boycott of our athletes, which is stopping our athletes from going to the Olympics. I think that would be a mistake. I understand the sentiment behind it, but it was the same sentiment that led Jimmy Carter to do that in 1980, and I think it didn't work then. I don't think it's fair to punish our athletes. I think there are young men and young women who spent years, decades, practicing and getting ready for the Olympics, and I don't think it's fair to make them the victims. And so I would not keep our athletes home, and I wouldn't make them the scapegoats. But what I would do is I'd do more than just a diplomatic boycott.
Would you advise American corporations to advertise and to have pavilions and to put their signs around the Genocide Olympics?
No. I think American corporations should show courage. They should show courage to stand up to the atrocities in China. And there's the difference. I think we go and speak the truth. We go and highlight China's oppression. We go and tell the world about what's happening. And that courage is something the Biden administration doesn't want to do, doesn't like to do. That courage is something American corporations are terrified to do. But, a great example of it is what the Women's Tennis Association is doing with Peng Shuai. Peng Shuai was the number one ranked women's doubles player in the world, the first number one ranked player China's ever had. And she, on social media, posted an allegation of sexual assault against a senior Chinese communist official, the former vice premier of the Chinese government. Within 30 minutes, that disappeared from social media, and then immediately thereafter, she was disappeared. And I got to say, the Women's Tennis Association has shown real courage. They've stood up, they've called it out, they've demanded that she be freed, and they've taken it even further, which is stepping forward with canceling their events in China, potentially losing millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in order to stand up and defend their athletes. I wish other sports leagues like the NBA would show the kind of courage the Women's Tennis Association is showing, and I think it highlights what we ought to be doing with the Olympics, which is when the world's eyes are on China, use it to highlight the evil that they're perpetrating.
I couldn't agree more. Ennis Cantor Freedom of the Celtics has been doing that, and bravo to him. Senator, I'm reminded 2 weeks ago when we sat down, I vented my frustration about presidential debates. This genocide has been ongoing. Joe Biden never got asked about this during all the debates. He didn't get asked about it during the debates in the presidential primary season. He didn't get asked about it during the main event with Donald Trump. And it's been well known since 2014. How do we fix presidential debates so that important issues like this and Ukraine get talked about before they're right in front of our noses?
Well, Hugh, I think the way presidential debates occur right now is broken, and it is broken in a way that skews wildly unfavored. Let's talk about the primaries first. In the primaries, 100% of the moderators of Democratic primaries are voting in the Democratic primaries. They're all left-wing journalists. On the Republican side, in the primaries, virtually 100% of the moderators are voting in the Democratic primaries. And they're almost all left-wing journalists. And when you have a bunch of left-wing Democrats as the moderators with a bunch of Republicans on stage, their objective is not the objective of a Republican primary voter. All right, figure out who's my guy, who am I going to support, who's the best candidate to beat the Democrats to lead the country. That's not their objective. Their objective is they hate every person on the stage, and they want to damage every one of them and make sure whoever gets the nomination loses to the Democrats. So I propose two very simple changes. Number one, for Republicans, every primary debate should be moderated by people who will vote and intend to vote in the Republican primary. Hugh, you're a great moderator because you actually want to see a strong Republican nominated.
Yes,
I think
true.
For primary debates, you ought, and look, there's a variety of opinions, but have people who actually want someone from that stage to win. That would do a much better job for primaries.
Would you allow people like Brett Baer, of whom I have no idea if he's a Republican or Democrat, he's such a straight shooter, would you let people like Brett ask questions?
You know what? I'd let him decide. Is he willing to say, I'm going to vote in the Republican primary? If the answer is no, then I wouldn't. Because the primaries have a purpose, which is choosing the nominee from that party. Now, in the general election, what do you do in a general election? That doesn't work as well. What I would do for a general election is stop the pretense, the false pretense of pretending these journalists are not partisan. I would instead embrace it and own it. So I would have a debate moderated by someone who is explicitly liberal and someone who is explicitly conservative, and simply have a debate that is moderated by Chris Hayes and Mark Levin.
Boy, would that be sparky! That would be great television too.
It would be fabulous television because you'd get now. Look, the lefty, Rachel Maddow and Hugh Hewitt. Now,
Better.
Rachel Maddow would ask questions of the Republicans that are nasty, that are clever, that are designed to make the Republican look terrible. Okay, we'd all know that. But, if you had smart conservatives, they would ask questions of the Democrats that are going to show the weaknesses of the Democrats' position. You'd get a much better debate rather than the farce we have right now.
I love the Cruz doctrine on debates. I might have the Hewitt corollary, which is if you're Brett Baer or Lester Holt, you can be on the panel. But I will say this. We've got to get rid of the Presidential Debate Commission. I mean, end it and announce that we will have nothing to do with it. Do you agree with that, Senator?
I do. I think the commission is functionally part of the Democratic National Committee. They don't function as a fair and impartial organization anymore. And I think debates are important. We need to focus on substance. Look, Joe Biden spent the entire campaign hiding in his basement. And we're seeing the consequences of his hiding in his basement, the absolute disaster. It's actually stunning. We're now nearly a year into the Biden presidency. We have disasters domestically. We have economically. We have inflation rising. We have supply chain crises. We have jobs being killed. We have illegal and abusive vaccine mandates. And as shocking as all that stuff is, it pales in comparison to the foreign policy disasters that Biden has allowed to occur, from our absolutely catastrophic withdrawal and surrender in Afghanistan, which will produce negative consequences for decades to come, to right now to Biden's total surrender to Putin, which is resulting in troops massing on the border of Ukraine, and we are potentially on the verge of a military invasion of Ukraine because of Biden and the Democrats' weakness. These are serious issues, and I think the debate process and the election process should actually focus on these substance and not the media whitewashing of the candidates they want to win.
Let's close there on the conversation between the president and Vladimir Putin today. I think he needs to draw a red line, and I think he needs to say that Nord Stream 2 is finished, and the Germans are finished if they don't finish it. If any troops more cross the Donbass or into Ukraine, do you agree with that, Senator?
I agree with the first half. I'd take away the if. Look, why is this happening? This is happening because of Joe Biden. Joe Biden got in office, and one of the very first things he did is he surrendered to Putin on Nord Stream 2. What is Nord Stream 2? It is a natural gas pipeline being built from Russia to Germany, and it is designed to cut Ukraine out of the transit. Right now,
45 seconds, Senator. Yeah, we're running.
Russia transits through Ukraine. We had stopped it. I authored sanctions legislation, bipartisan sanctions legislation, stop Nord Stream 2, and that kept Ukraine safe. Well, Biden decided to surrender to Putin, and as a result, you're seeing the troops mass. Here's what Biden ought to say. We're canceling Nord Stream 2 now, today. It's the single best thing he could do to stop Russia.
I couldn't agree more. Senator Ted Cruz, great to speak with you. Merry Christmas to you and yours. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. During the Christmas season, I think of people like Senator Tom Cotton with small boys, and I realize the burdens on him are immense. And I thank you for your time, because it's such a crazy time for small children with dads, Senator. So thank you for finding some time for me this morning.
It's always crazy with small kids. I noticed that you call your 2-year-old granddaughter Genghis Kate.
I do.
Which is probably an appropriate name for most 2-year-olds at some point or another. It was especially hectic in the Cotton household today because it's our younger son's 5-year birthday.
Oh!
December 7th, a date that will live in infamy, Hugh.
Oh, my goodness. You know, my brother-in-law is 9/11, and, you know, it's a mixed thing. You never forget their birthday, but you always say it in the same way. Happy birthday to him. Senator...
Well, another person who is born on a date that will live in infamy is the great Susan Collins. So she and my son share a birthay. So happy birthday to Susan as well.
Oh, very terrific. And yes, indeed. That's a great bit of news. You're the first person I've talked to since I saw this headline, and you're a person I have to ask about it. In the New York Times this morning, there appears a story. Ahead of Biden's democracy summit, China says, we're also a democracy. And it quotes this, quote, there is no fixed model of democracy. It manifests itself in many forms, the State Council, China's top governing body, argued in a position paper it released over the weekend. China's democracy that works. That is so stupid that I just want you to be the first to say so on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
That is very stupid, Hugh. China's insistence that it's democracy reminds me of the Soviet Union and all of its satellite countries, who always included words like democratic and republic in the title of their government or in their communist parties. Makes you think they protest a little too much. I do have to say, though, that I'm not sure what the president plans to accomplish in this so-called summit for democracy, other than perhaps offending the democracies that he did not invite, such as our NATO ally Hungary or Singapore, the little Sparta in Southeast Asia. It's not clear to me what's going to be a lasting accomplishment here, other than harming our relationship with some vital allies.
You know, nothing is clear to me about Team Biden. Poor Jake Sullivan has got to be octagon because he's got to answer 8 phones at a time to try and clean up every mess. I was on Brett Baer's special report last night. The diplomatic boycott came up. My position is it's better late than never, and it's better something than nothing, but no American corporation should spend $1 on this. Do you agree or disagree with that, Senator Cotton?
Well, yeah, Hugh, that's the least that we can do, both the diplomatic boycott and corporations like Coca-Cola not spending a dollar in Beijing. As you probably know, I've called for a complete and total boycott. I sent the Biden administration a letter about 6 months ago asking them how they were going to protect our athletes in China. They sent back a letter through classified channels, Hugh, although there's nothing classified about it. In fact, it's not marked classified. But the reason they did that, I think, is because they have no plan. They have no plan to protect our athletes from ubiquitous electronic and technical surveillance in Beijing or from DNA harvesting under the guise of coronavirus testing, or for that matter, outright hostage-taking. And if China will disappear one of its own star tennis athletes and trot her out for hostage videos, despite the condemnation of the civilized world, what do we think they'll do to one of our athletes? And then, of course, there's China's genocide against its own people and cracking down on the autonomy of Hong Kong that they committed themselves to. I don't think the United States should be participating in these games.
You recall, Senator, because you were the first public official, elected official to the bell on COVID, that early in the pandemic, China tried to blame American athletes who had visited Beijing, Wuhan, months before, for the pandemic. I do not doubt that they will blame our athletes for whatever goes wrong in China after these games. And I just can't believe we're not doing a better job. I just talked with your colleague, Senator Cruz, who came up with the Cruz Doctrine, which is only journalists who intend to vote in Republican primaries should ask questions at Republican debates, ditto Democrats, and that presidential debates should be a liberal and a conservative like Mark Levin and Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow and me. Because if that had been the case, Joe Biden would have been asked about the genocide in China 2 years ago when he should have been asked about it, Senator. What do you think of the Cruz Doctrine?
Well, I think, Hugh, that we need to be more mindful of who moderates and questions at Republican debates. You don't have to be an opinion journalist from the right to moderate one of those debates, but you have to be someone who's attuned to what Republican voters think and who ask questions that we care about. I mean, the most infamous example of this was George Stephanopoulos in the 2012 election cycle asking some question about birth control when none of the Republican candidates had ever said anything about the issue and no Republican voters probably cared to hear about it. Yet George Stephanopoulos was essentially carrying water for Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, asking questions that were designed to trap Republicans into some kind of stupid gotcha statement. We need reporters, we need journalists who are mindful and understand what Republican voters think and what they want to hear on that debate stage.
Senator, have you ever heard, really, I'm serious here, I have one example, a Democratic politician of stature or a Democratic president subjected to a serious, extended interview where the questions were pointed, specific, and relentless?
If I have, I can't recall a few. It doesn't come to mind immediately.
Roger Mudd and Ted Kennedy.
That's a good one. That's a little bit before my time, Hugh. I think I was.
I know.
So I'm sure you can. Again, as we talked last week, you're so advanced in age, you can remember these things that happened back in Millard Fillmore's time.
Hey, I want to ask you about Fred Hyatt, the editorial page editor of the Washington Post, who died suddenly yesterday after a week of illness. Fred was my editor, best editor I ever had. He was hell on wheels on the Chinese communists. Did you know him, Tom Cotton? Did you have?
I didn't know him well, but we had a chance to dine together on a couple of occasions and either travel together once to the Munich Security Conference. And although Fred and I frequently disagreed on matters, especially matters of domestic policy and politics, I had great respect for him as a person, a very decent, kind man, and for his stances on things like the Chinese Communist Party. I certainly don't agree with a lot of what the Washington Post editorializes, but I was saddened to hear the news about Fred Hyatt yesterday, and my sympathies go out to his family.
You know, we need more journalists who can see both sides of an issue, even if they come down on the wrong side of an issue. That's all journalism needs. Let me go, Senator, to this Build Back Better. Yesterday I had Michael Schellenberger on the show, who wrote the book San Francisco. Every single Democrat is going to own every dollar that is spent. There's $170 billion in this bill that's going to go for failed approaches to homelessness and affordable housing. It will make problems worse, not better. There's $3 billion for tree equity. There's $200 million for the Presidio. Do your Democratic colleagues realize they own every dollar, every idiot measure in this bill if they pass for it, if they vote for it?
Well, that may be one reason why they haven't been able to get the votes for it yet in the Senate, Hugh, is they started to look at that dog's breakfast of a bill that came out of the House of Representatives and pumped the brakes pretty hard. I mean, $200 million for Nancy Pelosi's hometown park, $3 billion for tree equity, whatever in the world that means, or all that money for those failed homelessness problems when you have just a terrible, terrible homelessness challenge across the country, especially in the West Coast states like California and Washington State. You know, I've heard from so many parents in Washington State who won't even take their kids to public parks anymore because of the homeless who are there, the needles, and all the other problems that accompany homelessness. It's not doing those homeless any favors to continue these failed approaches, certainly not doing families any favors, and people like Patty Murray are going to be held accountable by their voters if this bill passes into law.
You know, Senator, I went to Fox Studios last night, and as usual, they sent a car. And as I was going along, the driver and I talked, and we went through the tunnel that comes over from Virginia, and the homeless encampment was vast. And the driver, who is new to the country, you know, not immediately new, but relatively new, said, "This is just amazing. It's gotten so bad since I've got here in the 90s. You know, if they gave that money to the Salvation Army and Catholic Charities, it would actually work. But they are not going to give it to those. In fact, on the expansion of pre-K, they're going to exclude religious entities."
Yeah, Hugh, that's exactly right. Not only they're not going to support charitable and religious organizations that do important work for the homeless, but they are specifically and intentionally targeting all the kinds of customary, traditional kinds of child care or elder care, education that so many Americans depend upon. In the end, this is all about a giveaway to unions and trying to create vast workforces that are fertile hunting ground for service employee unions. They don't care about your neighbors getting subsidized to look after your kids or your Catholic daycare, your Jewish day school. They want to impose really absurd regulations on the level of education and credentialing and licensing that it takes to have a daycare, for instance, and then significantly higher wages in many parts of the country that only fuel more inflation, all the while making traditional forms of care or service in so many different fields prohibitively expensive.
This is correct. It's another reason why any Democrat who votes for this should be defeated. Let me close, Senator. You're Harvard Law trained, and I think they had con law here. I listened to the arguments in Dobbs. I believe that Roe and Casey will be overturned based on the questioning, which is a bit risky because questions never predict accurately. But what do you think, after listening to the arguments, reading the commentary, is going to happen? And do you applaud what you think is going to happen?
Well, first, I want to commend the Solicitor General of Mississippi, who did an outstanding job arguing that case. Like you, I always hesitate to read tea leaves and oral arguments, but I found many of the justices' questions very penetrating and really hard to rebut from the pro-abortion side. Justice Kavanaugh, in particular, pointed out a long series of cases over the last 125 years that have been overruled, and that most folks like the Solicitor General would probably applaud. I mean, just to take the most recent example, in 1986, the Supreme Court ruled that states can criminalize certain kinds of gay sexual conduct. And just 17 years later, in 2003, they reversed that, and then another 12 years later, they said that states must recognize gay marriage. 29 years, Hugh, from one pole to the other. It can't be the case that stare decisis is a Latin term meaning standing by only liberal decisions.
Yes.
If a decision is egregiously wrong from day one, as Roe was, then it doesn't matter if it's a liberal outcome or a conservative outcome.
That was Justice Alito's famous phrase, egregiously wrong.
Yeah. And as we saw, Hugh, too, in the argument, that it has taken the court into this wilderness where it is parsing these fine distinctions, and the only way to stop those essentially legislative questions being put into the courts is to acknowledge that Roe was egregiously wrong. If the court tries to find some kind of middle ground by overturning the viability line and upholding this 15-week ban. Well, Hugh, there's going to be a dozen more cases over the next 10 years on a 12-week bill or a 10-week bill or a 96-day waiting period instead of a 24-hour waiting period. These are all things that a free people can debate reasonably among themselves, but they can only do so if the court hasn't taken on that role and taken those decisions, which are essentially legislative questions, out of the hands of that free people.
Well said, and thank you for that. Merry Christmas, Senator. Maybe we'll talk again before that. And happy birthday to young Cotton. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, joined by Charlie Dombek, a sponsor of this show from Key City Capital. Merry Christmas, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing great, Hugh. Good to hear you
Charlie,
this morning.
I got an email yesterday, a text actually, from my friend John, the Butler grad, so we have to go slow for him, okay? And he said, is Charlie for real? And I said, yeah, he's for real. And as soon as I have a capital event on an investment, I'm putting money with Charlie, and I hope that fund is still open. And that is because I believe, and I said, but don't expect windfall. Charlie is about income, and Key City Capital is about smart investing for the long term. And you're a sponsor. People need to know that. But I have great confidence in you, and I want people to know what you do with the money they give you.
So we couple the money that clients give us with capital that we borrow institutionally to acquire passive workforce, single and multifamily rental real estate. And typically when we buy a real estate asset, 15% of the capital will come from the fund, which is from our personal capital that we invest as well as investor client capital, and 85% comes from an institutional lender. We'll typically perform a value add on that property we acquire and create about a 30% spread within a 12 to 18 month period. Then we'll refinance that property and bring back out the capital that came in from our clients and our investors, and then we'll duplicate the process. And we'll do that for 2 or 3 years. And after 2 or 3 years, we'll begin to look at what can we do to optimize the value of the property from an exit strategy perspective. Typically at years 4 and 5, we'll begin to sell properties. And what we're doing now in one of the funds that closed about a year ago is we're beginning to sell assets a little bit earlier because we've seen such high appreciation in the portfolio. We've got about a 50% equity spread in our most recently closed fund, which is only about 2.5 years old. So we generate profits from rents, and then we generate gains on sale at the time that we sell properties. That is the model. That's what we've done for about 13 years, and we do deliver on our value proposition, and we have exceptionally performing real estate investment assets right now.
Now, it is not without risk, right? I mean, the earth could open up and swallow up an apartment complex. A hurricane could come and destroy it, but you're insured. You've got all that good stuff.
Well, the great news about our real estate investments is you never have risk of one single asset having a problem or a catastrophic weather event, because when you invest with us, you invest in a pool of assets. Let's say we have a $50 million fund. We raise $50 million in capital. Well, that fund will have $700 to $800 million of real estate assets spread across a number of landlord-friendly states south of the Mason-Dixon line. So if one property has a problem, you lose rents, we have an insurance policy, but you're never going to suffer a loss or a problem with your investment because of the diversification across multiple states and multiple properties.
And I want to tell people again, this is not an offer to sell. It's an offer for you to go and get smart with Charlie at keycitycapital.com/Hugh. But Charlie, there is a record here, and you guys are trustworthy. You've never been sued. You've never been investigated by the SEC. I asked you all my due diligence questions, and I just want people to know I trust you. And are people trusting you from this show? Are they calling you up?
Hugh, this has been the best form of promotion that we've ever done in the history of our company. I would say we have north of 50 clients from your show that have become capital partners, that have invested with us, and that are enjoying the work that we do.
Well, that makes me happy, and I'll be among them soon. And I want people to know keycitycapital.com/Hugh. And that was the benefit of the Butler person. Now, let me ask you a question for the people who can't get into Butler, and they're really, really, really challenged. You also look at tax returns from the past. Why?
Well, I've been a tax planner my entire life, and I formed my CPA firm about 20 years ago to help clients recover dollars they unnecessarily pay in the form of state and federal income taxes. And there's two things that we do at Key City Capital. We are a wealth acceleration company that helps clients control the cost of taxation and improve investment performance. And what I have found as a career financial services professional is that 80% of your ability to grow your wealth rapidly and consistently is dependent upon how much you pay in state and federal income taxes and how well your investments perform. And that is our focus at Key City Capital.
That's a great focus. Charlie, it's been a great series of seminars for people. I know you sponsor them, but I'm glad to do it. I wouldn't do it except for the fact I just think you're offering a great service and a great product. Merry Christmas, Charlie. Talk to you in the new year, maybe.
Merry Christmas, Hugh. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. And to all of you out there, Merry Christmas to you. I'm looking at my Angel Tree numbers right now, and geez, you folks are generous. Thank you. I just deeply appreciate those who step up and help these children who have a mom or dad in jail. And that means you, Kathleen Z. in Michigan. Timothy B. in Ohio. Thank you, Tim B. William M. I know who you are, Tim B. William N. in Nevada. Leslie M. in Arizona. Howell L. in all caps in South Carolina. God bless you all. The Angel Tree banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. Step up, step out, and come back tomorrow for the next Hugh Hewitt Show.